The vacuum of discourse is alluring for any game, and something I often don't have the time to delve into given how ever-flowing conversation and talking points are, but I can't help but stare helplessly as the black hole of Avowed has slowly pulled me in over the last few weeks. I've hit the event horizon, and I fear the only answer is to keep going. It sure is cold out here in space. Luckily, I have hundreds of online commentators to keep me company. I'm not against trudging my way through Discourse, and it can be a good tool for cementing broader consensus, but I can't help but feel like so much of the conversation around Avowed is, well, a little silly. This video will be mostly focused on ideas around Avowed and not Avowed itself, which is a shame, but I will get some of my thoughts on it a little later on. However, I felt a deeper analysis of what I think Avowed gets right and wrong isn't actually all that necessary and may actually detract from the points I'm trying to make here. As much as it pains me to say it, let's get into the discourse. Before we start, I think it's important to note that by discourse, I'm primarily referring to the way people discuss Avowed on social media. There are broader constructive pieces and videos people have made and will continue to make, but that's quite different to what I'm referring to. This video will mostly be a capture of what I've witnessed, and though not wholly representative of communication around the game, should be indicative to illustrate my point. People make throwaway comments on social media and are certainly more callous than in person, but it bleeds into their conversations and the way people think and act. Much of the talking points I'll get into have travelled across to YouTube comments, and I've even heard them in person. Social media is silly, but also surprisingly important. Let's move from social media into the catalyst for a lot of this. This fairly popular video entitled Avowed vs Oblivion, which was then reacted to by Twitch streamer Asmongold, frames a lot of my central argument well. The video in question compares some of Oblivion's qualities with Avowed to paint Avowed in a negative light. It starts with the character firing arrows in the air and watching them fall down. It then moves on to prop physics, where you can knock items around on tables just by hitting them, which is something you can't do in Avowed. After this, it moves to AI pathing and control, highlighting its effect on the fighting system of Oblivion. In the clip, a group of bandits are lured into a guard who then fights them. When compared to Avowed, the same does not happen, and the enemy in Avowed runs straight into a guard and gets trapped. Asmongold then goes on to say that he thinks the game won't hit 50,000 concurrent players.
Guys, I'm starting to think that it might not hit 50,000 concurrent players.
For clarity on that figure, 50,000 concurrent players would push Avowed into the top 350 games of all time, according to SteamDB. Of course, I don't think Avowed will hit that number either, but the jump in logic here strikes me as rather extreme. It's fairly easy to grab clips of silly things happening in Oblivion, or pretty much any game, and I think people's willingness to jump to this conclusion within 3 minutes of a comparison video is indicative of a broader problem with the way we see games. In fairness to Asmongold, he does admit to enjoying the game, but also compares it to liking Wuthering Wave, despite being critical of it. He frames it almost like enjoying the game is a moral failing, which feels oddly telling here.
You want to take back that 7 yet? Do you want to know the honest truth? No, because I've had fun playing the game. But the problem is that I play Wuthering Waves too, and it's a pay-to-win Chinese bullshit gotcha game. And how's the dick taste?
Okay, I'll build on this a little later, but I want to give you a little more of the argument first. After further comparisons of AI, the video Asmongold reacts to then moves on to stealing items. This is one of the biggest talking points I've seen since launch. It's worth noting that the game sort of does react to you stealing. Some NPCs will note it, but from more of a lens of you are blessed by a god and an envoy, so you can do as you please. There's even a scene early on where you take a dagger and they say you are effectively stealing from an active crime scene. Asmongold does facetiously acknowledge this point, but I actually think it's no more relevant than some throwaway context to the game. It's not a defense of the stealing system because it doesn't need one. You can't steal things doesn't function as a critique in and of itself, and the belief it can is indicative of broader problems with media criticism. As a nitpick to enforce a broader point, it's fine. If one wants to make an argument about the world through this lens paired to other more substantial critiques, I can understand why. I think there's some attempt to do so in the video's titling, but it's mostly gesturing at a lack of world depth without outright saying it or bothering to commit to anything more substantial than saying a game 2 decades ago did it. In itself, devoid of context, this is entirely meaningless. This isn't to say it's not worth talking about or not immersion breaking, but just that if the argument around a game is X game does it and Y doesn't, it feels unfair to the experience sitting in front of you. It sort of feels like giving out about synthpop for not having enough guitar work. I love guitar-driven music, but the experience you tell yourself you are getting isn't the same as the experience you've been offered. Obsidian previously worked on Fallout New Vegas, and Avowed is a fantasy RPG, so the comparison to Bethesda's fantasy RPGs makes a lot of sense, but it doesn't serve the game in front of you because what you have is different. I think from my 10 or so hours with the game so far, it feels much closer to the likes of Mass Effect, a very story-driven, more linear experience that is mostly focused on character dialogue, elements of political intrigue with a focus on speech checks and exploration. Even the foundations of your companions feel very much like classic BioWare to me. Lockpicking is also critiqued in this video, mostly because it's not really implemented in Avowed. Instead of being a minigame, lockpicking in Avowed is almost closer to a checkpoint system, a blockade that stops you from accessing a chest or a door without putting down the coin for lockpicks. Then we move on to pickpocketing, where Asmongold simultaneously complains about Avowed not having it and then finds out Oblivion does.
So you can pickpocket anybody? Basically?
What do you think?
Oh shit. So you... Guys, this is...
Guards, we've got a pickpocket here.
How does it know?
Stop right there, criminal scum.
This all strikes me as fairly rich. He spends a video critiquing Avowed for not being like Oblivion, a game he hasn't even played. I think the best thing that came of Asmongold's video is him realizing he should probably play Oblivion and Skyrim, which he seemingly hasn't. I think if you're playing it because it has prop physics and arrows come back down, I'm a little surprised that's what it took, but I mean, it's good that you're giving it a go, I suppose. I don't mean to really come down hard on Asmongold here, as that's not really the point of the video. The point I'm making is that Asmongold is indicative of the broader market engaging and propagating this critique. Asmongold's video has well over 1 million views by now, and has lots of people in the comments vehemently agreeing with the point he makes, which are effectively the points being made by the video he's watching. Prop physics, arrows coming back down and stealing items isn't what makes Oblivion so special. You can make the argument it's part of the way that world is set up, but these games are so much more than the pithy minigames and the ways it immerses you. And more importantly, there are so many great games that don't have the level of detail that props do in Oblivion. And as well as that, there are plenty of things Oblivion doesn't do that great games do, and this comparison is a killer that serves no one. It's an energy leech, sucking the fun out of discovering what makes these games unique. I don't want another Oblivion, but just a bit prettier. I want games to take whatever form they do, and I want to engage with them as they are. I'm not saying that elements of this critique can't inform your opinion or act as a good conversational tool to tell others why comparable games work better. I'm saying Avowed is bad because you can't even shoot NPCs, is helping no one, and actively stifles the great ways that we can deconstruct and criticize them. What becomes quite annoying about all of this is that some nitpicky elements one could highlight can contribute positively to broader criticism. Oftentimes these critiques feel like the start of a sentence just left to linger without a full stop. It's the basis of something where others are left to fill in the gaps. Unfortunately, too many of those gaps are filled in by people who appear to have not actually played it. In fairness to Asmongold, he had, and he seemed to think it was a 7 out of 10. Importantly, there are ways that Obsidian could make its world feel more cohesive that some of this critique might gesture broadly at, that it would benefit from, but it's not an arrow sticking into stone that does that, and I think misdiagnosing the source of this can often be as harmful as missing it. I don't want the new standard for fantasy RPGs to be, can an arrow stick into stone? Drumroll please, because I'm going to finally get to my opinion on Avowed as of right now. So far, I think Avowed is fine. It's good enough to keep me playing, with some interesting plotlines, good companions, but not so impactful that I feel it will stay with me when I hit the credits. I very much get the feeling I'll look back at Avowed a few years from now with general positivity and not much more. In fact, I have Pirate Yakuza and Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 installed, and every hour I hear their sweet siren song just a little louder. Avowed's lore and the way it builds upon the Pillars of Eternity games is thoughtful and grounded. Sorry for the pun. Combat is genuinely a lot of fun, perhaps the best combat Obsidian has ever had, and it's also a joy to explore. However, it's quite janky in a few ways. Performance isn't super consistent on PC, the game feels a bit more popcorny than I was expecting. Its highs never quite hit high enough to make a huge impact, and this is why I don't suspect Avowed will really stick with me. Importantly though, there are plenty of games that have stuck with me that have none of the things critiqued. For transparency's sake, now that I'm talking about my time playing the game, Xbox gave me a 1-month code for coverage reasons, and that's how I played Avowed. I think when something feels a bit confused, it can be important to figure out where it all comes from. Avowed is in an unlucky position of being in the crosshairs of a handful of different types of groups, which makes it hard to pin specific places where this critique comes from, but I'll build my argument around a few distinct areas. First and most honest, some people simply dislike the game, its systems, and the way it sets itself up. When huge waves of criticism come out around a game they already don't like or do like but are just generally less receptive to, this offers them a new talking point that they don't necessarily have to put in the work to figure out. I'm not disparaging someone for that, it's a natural part of conversation and communication and sort of our biggest strength as human beings. If you dislike the game, that's fine. I do think that honest critique can sometimes be a Trojan horse though. I say honest and not necessarily fair here, and I do that intentionally. I think that people who attempt to engage with a level of good faith in criticizing games often get lumped in with groups that are less honest, and language is often used to imply that those engaging honestly and those who aren't are in the same camp. Not all critique holds the same weight, and not all critique comes from a good place. This isn't an argument to dismiss it, of course, merely part of how we should take that information in, and a good rule of thumb for the best way to spend your time. I think part of the reason I chose Asmongold to discuss in this video is that, for his many flaws, I don't know if I believe he's disingenuous with his beliefs. I think he's quick to find them, and that can often be informed by an audience that intentionally bolsters a specific group or narrative, as is the case with many streamers, but I think the more idiosyncratic elements of his beliefs imply something more genuine. He fits into a broader online sect, but doesn't always fall in line. There's a reason why it's so much easier to talk about art in person sometimes. It's hard to ironically detach yourself from another human being when you are putting their words to a face, and there's not much to be gained here other than a good conversation. Then that moves us to more insidious groups. You may not be aware, and I barely am, but console wars still happen in 2025. The childish beef summoned between consoles decades ago goes on, except now its key figures are financially incentivized to never back down. Blue checkmark Twitter accounts held hostage by their audiences, streamers who know which side to appeal to. These all play out in a sort of theatre where one side facetiously throws out thinly veiled pot stirring as critique, the other side replies, and you have yourself a good old rap beef, except no side is really encouraged to fully win. Like a wrestler getting out of a pin at 2.5 seconds, if that number hits 3, the show is over. As saddening as this may sound, sometimes our ties to our allegiances online are our social spaces, so why would I ever move away from being a troll if it means losing my friends and income in the process? And this builds me to my last and most malicious group. Those who dislike Avowed for some perceived political injustice and see critiquing it as a grand punishment for its wrongdoings. On its face, I think it's fine to dislike something for its political themes, leanings, and purpose. I think trying to spend time to analyze it in that context can also be an important part of understanding it, but the Avowed discourse represents, to me, the least thoughtful and most disingenuous arming of that political movement. Much of the language feels manipulative and outright vindictive. My problem isn't with the idea of using your own ethical framework to ground how you tackle something, but instead the way in which this has been done. Avowed was primarily targeted by the third group as it was perceived to be progressive or quote-unquote woke. This is down to many factors we'll dig a little deeper into, but broadly the belief that groups of people are making their way into games, pushing for greater representation of minority groups, and the pushback here is largely driven by an antagonism towards that. This is all fairly situational and inconsistently applied to already successful games like Baldur's Gate 3 or Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, the latter we'll delve into in a bit. Comparison is paramount to this discussion. Let's take this account right here. The comparison is that Skyrim has pretty players and Avowed doesn't. Malthea is perceived to be manlike, one of the key talking points of this political sect, as well as not liking gay relationships and representation of POC, which are things that have been part of the RPG genre for some time. The presence of these clipped images of women with more rigid jaws is alleged to be indicative of a broader decline of hot women in games. This belief also feels incongruent when actually playing many modern games, and thus why comparison through single frames feels like a disservice to games being criticised. There's even more to dig into when analysing this account. First, Malthea looks a bit different in context, and also she's a scrappy guard who presumably fights wild animals. Second, she isn't being compared to Skyrim, a game that has plenty of ugly NPCs. She's being compared to Skyrim plus its mods, which is even more bizarre to me. This ultra-specific level of comparison is indicative of the broader picture I'm trying to paint here. Little of it ends up in a place of good faith, even though some of it could be just shoddy but honest reasoning at the start, though I'm still holding out hope this is parody. To be fair, though the account above does defend this image, even part of Asmongold's Reddit find it a bit silly. However, this exact image was shared seemingly earnestly by a rather large YouTuber. Even if it's initially intended to be ironic, which I'm certainly hoping, much of it is subject to context collapse and runs online. It's important to note that this is public, online, and on a platform designed to get people angry. It takes a few moments to make an inflammatory tweet to rile people up, which then furthers their reach. I do acknowledge my role in that cycle here. I am reacting, talking, and possibly extending that discourse to the few who might watch this video. However, playing into someone's desires isn't inherently a reason not to do it, it's just a sign you should be careful when you do. I think as a way of expressing this, I'd like to draw attention to Michael Does Life's Twitter video on Avowed, where he jokingly thanks Obsidian for making a quote-unquote true next-generation RPG, then proceeds to point out that you can't shoot random NPCs. This is clearly intended to evoke a criticism of the game, but before I delve into the argument that being able to kill an NPC isn't that fine line between a game being good or bad, I'd like to draw attention to their channel, specifically LA Noir Sucks, a video uploaded 13 years ago. In it, Michael claims the game sucks, primarily because you can't buy a hot dog at a hot dog stand on the street. He takes a magnifying glass to the game and proclaims it as bad.
Sucks. But before we get into why it sucks, let's get into the main menu, because that's probably the coolest thing and the only cool thing that you're gonna see in the game. Okay, so here I am, I pulled over by a hot dog vendor, and I'm gonna go see if I can get a hot dog. That guy just got a hot dog, he's eating it right now, and I'm gonna go see if I can do the same. It doesn't appear so.
I think you may be starting to see the point I'm making here. This is genuinely quite a funny clip that has aged so strangely. Michael here uploads a video every now and then with a photoshopped copy of a game he does not own, with effectively the same smarmy script, gloating to people who've clicked as to why they are idiots.
It's over! How does it feel, Snowy fanboys, to be a part of the Losers Club? Believe me, it must be so incredibly sad.
He also vaguely sounds like Trump. I'm not too sure why, or I don't know what happened there. It's an effective bit, and one he's been doing for over a decade now. I'm not guessing at his intent here, I'm just looking at his channel page. He takes the opposite opinion almost every time one forms, and uses that to get people mad. Despite this person's channel being a fairly obvious joke, the comments to that original Twitter thread is filled with people both pro and anti-Avowed attacking each other. He's like some strange puppet master who is effectively a vessel for people to hate each other. However, after all these years, people are genuinely using very fake arguments from him as a reason to dislike the game. Todd Howard just does nothing and keeps winning, gloats a tweet comparing the fact that you can't kill chickens and NPCs in Avowed to the fact that you can in Skyrim. See, many wanted Avowed to fail before it even launched. One viral tweet gloated about Avowed failing on February 16th, 2 days before the official launch of the game. You could pay extra with this release to play it 5 days early, which is honestly one of the worst parts of Avowed's launch, which means that its early release had only been live 3 days before being declared a failure. Another video stated that it was dead on arrival on February 19th. On the 21st, accounts had declared the game had failed because it only had a peak concurrent player of just over 17,000. Now, Avowed's peak concurrent player base on Steam sits at 18,658, which indicates sales of north of 100,000 on Steam alone. According to a Bloomberg article, Obsidian says it is happy with these sales. They are contextualized somewhat by the fact that Avowed launched on Xbox as well and was a day one Game Pass release. Starfield still managed to pull in a peak of 330,723, but at least some of that could be attributed to the fact that Bethesda games are partially pulled along by mod support. Buying it on Steam gives you the game functionally forever, and it's easier to mod there. As far as I'm aware, you can enable modding on PC Game Pass, but it's a longer, more involved process and one I haven't personally done. And this brings me to the point of wanting this game to fail. Those in that last camp of arguers and agitators want the failure of a game to represent the strength of their political movement. Many moved off Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 when they realized the game was far too popular to equate any broader popularity with any particular movement, but some stayed, and you can spot which is which pretty quick. After calling Kingdom 2 Deliverance quote-unquote one of the biggest insults to gamers and Christians in recent years, due mostly to an optional homosexual relationship, one user claimed player figures were dropping like a rock. This manipulation, the hyper-specific focus on a single element without the surrounding context, can be explained when you consider that wide swathes of gamers go to sleep. That dropping happens with every single release on Steam. Since declaring the game was dropping, it managed to beat the concurrent player record at the time by just shy of 100,000 players. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 couldn't even reach 300,000 when it supposedly sold 1 million was that same account's follow-up. This, of course, was a manipulation once again of basic stats. Not everyone who buys a game will be playing it at the same time because people exist in different countries, different time zones, and different stages of their life, and concurrent players of north of 200,000 is indicative of a game selling far more than just 1 million copies. Following this up, 2 of the biggest accounts pushing the narrative that Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 had failed then pointed to declining worth of stock for Embracer Group, which is the parent company that owns the developer behind Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. Embracer Group took a huge hit just before the launch of the game, but took an even bigger one in December and has broadly seen a huge fall-off since its peak in 2021. Embracer has been in trouble many times over the last few years, buying out and then selling off studios being a key factor. It had huge growth emboldened by a $2 billion deal which then fell through, meaning it had to cut off many companies quickly to stay in business. I'm sure it's far more complicated than my Cliff Notes would suggest, but even they are more nuanced than the narrative painted here. Stocks are complicated and often manipulated to paint narratives, so make sure to be careful when you read those graphs. A big one to actually catch people out is to look at how large the sample they've grabbed the stock at and see how that affects it. A lot of the narrative around releases like this is just grabbing the last day or the last week and seeing a drop and attributing that to some other factor, but broadly speaking, these are far more complicated than they're made out to be. Some groups pushing for the decline of Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 then opted for conspiracy, accusing the developer of lining pockets to flood the timeline. This argument is reliant on the fact that multiple big pages posted that Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 had hit 2 million copies sold around the same time. Not only is this big news, so it would make sense for accounts to post it, but the account alleging conspiracy accuses them all of posting within an hour of the announcement. Not only is that not a weird thing to do, but 5 seconds of research shows that IGN posted their announcement 4.5 hours after Warhorse Studios. This is complete with its own news story, presumably to get a few clicks off the news. One could contribute this to not bothering to check any of the information you decide to publicize or actively using it to manipulate people. I'm not really sure which. Oddly, the screenshot they posted included one account that is itself critical of the elements they are. After all of this argumentation failed, some accounts then swapped to accusing stans of Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 of being groomers. Here's, I think, part of what has stopped me from talking about this particularly manipulative and rotted sect of the internet before. All of these arguments are so shallow and open to criticism that it's hard not to believe they too are theatre. However, if they are real or not isn't the end of the story, as many in these sects do seem to agree or argue for their points and are actively rewarded for doing so. Just because they get needed attention from all of it doesn't mean it's not deserving of thoughtful critique. The decoupling of people from their arguments and the incentives that push them is important when wading through the discourse. I think after witnessing it all for a long time, the best answer I can come up with is spending the energy you have for it, engaging as honestly as possible, and accepting that some will truly never change. However, my goal in this isn't really for anyone mentioned to look at my video and change their mind. It's an appeal to see through the facade of what they're doing and argue for a better community at large. I think we, as people who enjoy games, enjoy art, and just as human beings, deserve better than being manipulated by constant aggression. These are perverse structures summoned through troll tactics that have somehow found actual political and social ground, and it's important to look inside that wooden horse before you send it hurtling into the castle. When I say Avowed is undeserving of its discourse, I'm effectively saying almost every game is. They are clear bad actors informing this that not only work to actively atrophy conversation, but cash in on it too. There are plenty of problems with games, and until we get to a point of being able to talk honestly about them, I don't see its worst parts getting any better. This was a much longer video than I'd actually intended to write. I didn't really have plans to talk about Avowed. It's something I had broad interest in, but didn't feel was necessary to cover unless something really big popped up or something sort of drew me in. But this felt necessary to me. A lot of this discourse feels so unneeded, and all of the incentives around it are so skewed and wrong. I think that no matter where we fall on what we think about Avowed here, I think we deserve so much better than the worst actors. Thank you for watching my video. If you've got this far, I don't know, leave some comments on people who you think are critiquing things right. I think I'd really like to sort of try and improve my social media feed and not exist in a bubble that's so, I want to say hateful, but that's not really the word. I don't mind when people hate games. In fact, I quite like to have those discussions. It's more that it feels so perverse. It all feels so gross, I think it is where I'm getting at with all of this. If you have people you watch regularly who you think I should check out, let me know, because I think that would be quite refreshing. Also, if you want a game to check out Afterlove EP. I played that recently. I thought it was good. I'm thinking about doing a video on that too. What else I've been playing? Pirate Yakuza I have downloaded, haven't started it yet, but I will play that. Just trying to think of some good things to weigh this out so it's not all negative. We should care about games, so I should care enough to talk about them without needing this kind of a setup, I suppose. I mean, that's the whole point of the channel, isn't it? Anyway, I'm blabbing about nothing. Play Afterlove. I like that. My mind has gone entirely blank on what else I've been playing recently. I tried the open roads, thought it was okay. Firewatch recently, really liked that. I have a video on that, you can watch it somewhere. Anyway, thank you for watching. If you like this and want to hear me talk more or want to encourage me to delve into the more social themes, I suppose, into having some sort of take, then please like, comment, subscribe, whatever else you want to do. And if not, that's cool. I definitely know that some of my videos won't be for anyone or everyone who watches me or whatever. That feels so full of myself. Either way, it just felt like something I wanted to write about for 5,000 words on a Saturday night. Either way, hope whoever's listening has had a good week and has opinions that are their own about Avowed, because that feels important right now. Thanks.